I just want to come back to this idea of belief that I've spoken about quite a bit. And it partly relates to a video I was making a few minutes ago to do with how different kinds of theological traditions regard some of the claims made within those religions as in a slightly different way. So a kind of fundamentalist approach to the Christian story is slightly different, and the belief in that story is slightly different to the take on it that are sometimes called sophisticated theologians or thinking theologians might take it. And I think that relates to the idea of belief. Let me see if I can put this out in my mind really. When I'm probably stereotyping, unfortunately here, but never mind. When a certain fundamentalist Christian says that they believe in the death and resurrection, literal resurrection of Jesus Christ, that's a factual belief. When a different kind of theologian, maybe Francis Collins, maybe the Archbishop of Canterbury, maybe someone working in a different kind of apostolic tradition, when they say they believe in the death and resurrection of Christ, I don't think they mean the same thing. I think there's a significant difference. And I think it relates, or perhaps it's a corollary of that other kind of difference that I've sometimes thought about. Well, let me just see if I can find a way to work to that. I think if I was to ask both those people, when you say believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, do you mean believe in the same way that you believe in the existence of this bench that I'm standing in front of? Very nice little bench, maybe the old railway. Do you believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ in the same way that you believe in that bench? I think there'd have to be different answers to that if they were being honest. I think there is a certain kind of fundamentalist mindset which we have to say, yes, it's a fact, as hard, as resistant, as demonstrable as the existence of the bench. Whereas I think if they were honest, a different kind of theological approach would have to say, no, I don't believe it in the same way. I believe it in a different way. So what's that different way? And I think that there's a correlation there between those different kinds of beliefs, or a kind of more perhaps differentiated way of believing as opposed to a unitary way of believing, and something like reality. I know certainly that people who have been through mystical experiences quite often come out of it saying that the reality that they experienced whilst they were in the throes of this particular experience was more real than real. More real than real. It's a kind of experience of reality by which this reality doesn't change. You still see trees and benches and dogs and disused railway lines. But this reality doesn't lose anything by that comparison. But you recognise that the attribution of real, which you thought was as firm and as far developed as it could get, was actually not, and there is another more profound reality which one can experience. And I am talking about a felt sense of reality here. I'm not talking about some kind of shared consensus. And when Newberg and de Killy write a little bit about this in their stuff about cognitive operators, and they refer to this particular cognitive operator, which is a kind of subroutine of the brain by which sensory data is turned into experience, is one of the operators they claim to identify as what they call the existential operator, which is a kind of little routine in the brain which takes data from the senses, or takes data from somewhere, let's say the senses, and then assigns it a valency to whether it's real or not. So we unproblematically recognize that dreams aren't real once we wake up, of course, and we unproblematically recognize optical illusions as not real, and we unproblematically recognize mirages as not real once we've been informed of that. And the way we do that apparently is by the assigning of a certain kind of existential valency to that, so we recognize its unreality, as opposed to recognizing the reality of our senses right now, recognizing the reality of trees and benches and dogs. So I think what I'm looking at there is, and I think where this is going, is, if I can just return to belief, when a theologian says, and I might be wrong here, when a theologian says that they believe in, for example, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, it's because they're confronted by a choice. If they say they don't believe it, or they don't believe it in the same way that they believe in the existence of physical objects in the world, then at the moment the only alternative to that is to render the kind of objects less than believable. In other words, fictional. If you're kind of identifying an object or an entity or a person like Jesus and saying that you don't believe in them in the way that you believe in trees and objects, then you're pretty much saying they're less than believable. They're fictional. They're like Harry Potter. They're like Santa Claus. They're like leprechauns and fairies. Because that's the only direction that, in our routine language, belief travels. There is belief in the real, and anything less than belief in the real is fiction. But if there is, and certainly in mystical language and mystical understanding, there is a sense that something is more real than real, then it should become possible to believe in something that's more real than real, and have a different kind of meaning of belief, which isn't a reduction of the status of the thing you're believing in, but assigns that entity to the status of this other kind of understanding of real. Now, I'm aware there's all kinds of problems with that. I would not like my life governed by people who believed in a higher reality, if I can call it that didn't lend itself to any kind of empirical study, and to which I personally didn't have access. I would have problems with that. But at least I can understand it. At least it makes kind of sense. Believing in a Jesus Christ that died and came back from the dead, but that is part of a reality which is different and perhaps more existentially positive than this one. I can kind of go along with the logic of that at least. Just a coda to that is that, I think I certainly, and I'm guessing many people, do routinely believe in things which belong to realities which are different to this one, and which we do consider more profound. And I guess those, for myself, I'm looking at ones that are generated by scientific procedures. So, for example, and this is a bad example, I just can't think of another one. So, for example, if the evidence for an 11-dimensional universe was strong, and I don't know if it is strong, but if it was strong, and if it was available to me, and I was able to consult that evidence, and proper procedures were in place to demonstrate that evidence, then I would have to say that I would probably feel, at least, I would probably be inclined to say that the 11-dimensional universe was more real than the 3-dimensional universe that I live in. That I live in a kind of 3-dimensional shadow of a different universe. In the same way that the denizens of Flatland live in a kind of 2-dimensional shadow of a 3-dimensional world. It's not quite right, but that's kind of how I'm imagining that. And so I think there are, depending on how you interpret the word real and how you interpret the word belief, I think there absolutely is a way of saying that we routinely believe in things that aren't real, even the most empirical and rational of us. But the status of that real and the assignation of belief to that status is through very particular processes. That was a bit long-winded. I guess all I'm saying is that belief is not as simple as I'd perhaps thought.